Today on the Spiritual Reality Podcast, we are going to be taking a look at the highly controversial Epic City in Texas and investigate whether Sharia law can coexist with the U.S. Constitution. I am your host, Jim Richmond. Thanks for joining me. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share if you appreciate the content that we put out every week. You may have heard that a city is being planned in Texas that will pretty much be an Islamic community. And that raises all kinds of questions, right? Will a city that is designated to be for Muslims welcome other people? Will they have Islamic laws? Can we have municipalities that are kind of considered to be driven by a particular religion? Can we even do that in the United States? And is that consistent with the U.S. Constitution? This is a sensitive topic, one that stirs emotions on all sides. I get it. Our goal today is to explore the spiritual, legal, and cultural dimensions of this debate with clarity and compassion. As always, we're going to ground ourselves in truth, reason, and a higher perspective, so settle in and let's unpack this together. All right, as we get into this, let me just say, first of all, that this is something I've been thinking about for a long, long time. Like, how can the United States be founded on the principles that it's founded on and driven by the principles that it's driven by in the United States Constitution, and at the same time welcome everybody, including people who kind of don't like the principles in the U.S. Constitution? So this is something I've been sitting on, kind of thinking about and trying to think of how to approach this in a fair way. So let's just start with the basics. What is Sharia law, and why does it spark such an intense debate when we think about it alongside the U.S. Constitution? Well, Sharia, derived from the Quran and Hadith, is a framework for Islamic life. It's a broad system that governs personal conduct, things like prayer, diet, dress, family life, but it can also extend to legal matters like contracts and inheritance and in some in interpretations, criminal justice. In many Muslim-majority countries, Sharia influences legal systems to varying degrees, from personal status laws to, like in Indonesia to stricter applications like in Saudi Arabia. So the U.S. Constitution is obviously the bedrock of American governance. It's a secular document that is founded on Christian principles, which is kind of an awkward kind of thing, right? Like, it is a secular document, but it's founded on Christian principles, and it's designed to protect individual liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, press, assembly, all those freedoms, and it also ensure equal protection under the law. It's about structure, it's about checks and balances, it's about inalienable rights. So all of those things. Sharia, on the other hand, is rooted in what they see as divine authority, aiming to align human behavior with God's will as it's understood in the Islamic tradition. So what are some potential issues with a community like Epic City happening in the U.S.? Well, the first thing is some people are concerned about First Amendment issues, the Establishment Clause. The First Amendment prohibits the government from establishing or favoring any religion. If Epic City is designed to be a 402-acre Muslim-centric development with a mosque and an Islamic school and community facilities, will it basically be a Muslim municipality? Could it create a de facto religious enclave that appears to favor one faith over others? Now, I mean, we've seen school boards that were gifted a Christian flag by the local ministers association have to take it down, right? We've seen so many challenges to any hint of Christianity in local and state and national politics. Those challenges always come with that mantra of separation of church and state. Now, I want to go back over this again. I've talked about separation of church and state before, but let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, I think our founders wanted to make sure that a state religion was not set up because they wanted to allow various denominations or views on Christianity. I really don't think they ever imagined other religions becoming dominant here. Now, there's nothing we can do about that. They never wrote that down. They never said, hey, this is how we see it. But because of their worldview at the time, I really think they really were just trying to protect different sects of Christianity. That's it. I don't think they envisioned like, hey, this is going to become a totally different, a nation founded on totally different religion. Secondly, separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. And I cannot say that enough, and I'll continue to say it. It's not in the Constitution. Third, the Establishment Clause was put there to keep the state out of the church, not to keep Christianity from influencing state and public affairs. Very important that we understand that. Again, doesn't make a whole lot of difference because we don't function that way. As of right now, because of some past Supreme Court decisions that treated separation of church and state almost like it was in the Constitution, even though it's not, because of that, we operate as if the church has to stay out of state and public affairs. That's not what was originally intended. In fact, they leaned heavily on Christianity in the way they set things up. Okay, but having said all of that, we are where we are on this issue right now. So I want to know, where are groups like the Freedom from Religion people on this issue? Where they're always running around and making sure that no religion is ever being pushed. A community is being set up that seems to be driven by one particular religion, but they are nowhere to be found. They seem to only be against the religion that our founders actually used to shape the country, not other religions. And it may be that the strict enforcement of the doctrine of separation of church and state may actually help hold back domination by other religions in our country. In other words, Christians for so long have said, hey, like, you've got the wrong view of separation of church and state. You've got the wrong view of the Establishment Clause. But maybe we don't want to change it right now, because otherwise it seems like that culture is so bent towards allowing any religion or religious domination, even as long as it's not Christian. So this strict enforcement that we've had of separation of church and state may actually be something we can appeal to at this point, to say, hey, we're not going to be dominated by this, or we're not going to allow other religions to set up their own municipalities. Like that you wouldn't allow Christians to do that. And so, for some reason, the left's hatred of Christianity seems to just have left them wide open towards other religions. And so maybe, again, the strict view that has been taken on separation of church and state may actually be a help to us in this situation. Critics, including Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Senator John Cornyn, have expressed concerns that Epic City might operate as a Sharia city, potentially prioritizing Islamic law over U.S. law. Now, the developers deny this, and I want to make that clear, stating that the community will follow federal and state laws and any internal legal framework based on Sharia, like family disputes or community regulations or whatever, still could be seen, though, as establishing a religious legal system violating secular neutrality supposedly required by the Establishment Clause. And so that's the first issue that you have, is you've got just a First Amendment Establishment Clause issue of are they going to be setting up a culture, setting up a community, setting up a municipality based on religious laws more than public laws. So the second thing is the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection and due process for all citizens. And certain interpretations of Sharia, particularly in conservative applications, include provisions that could conflict with this principle. For example, unequal inheritance rights for men and women, or penalties for apostasy that restrict religious freedom. If Epic City were to adopt such rules, even informally within the community, it could discriminate against residents based on gender, religion, or other protected characteristics. Texas Representative Jeff Leach raised this concern in a February 2025 letter to the Attorney General Ken Paxton, suggesting that Sharia-based practices could violate equal protection. And again, Epic's developers assert compliance with the Fair Housing Act and non-discrimination laws, but still public skepticism persists, fueled by a lot of things going on social media about exclusionary practices. So without clear, enforceable safeguards ensuring equal treatment, the community structure could be seen as undermining constitutional equality. And if the community is being advertised as built by Muslims for Muslims, how open are they to selling property to non-Muslims. So it's an issue. The third issue that some people are raising is an Eighth Amendment issue. Prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. The Eighth Amendment does prohibit cruel and unusual punishment, a standard that is rooted in evolving societal norms. But some interpretations of Sharia include punishments like flogging or even amputation, and they're incompatible with this amendment, of course. While, again, there's no evidence that suggests that Epic City plans to implement such measures, critics point to extreme applications of Sharia in countries like Saudi Arabia as a cautionary example. The fear is that a self-contained community over time could adopt practices that deviate from constitutional standards, especially if insulated from external oversight. So Texas's 2017 House Bill 45 banning foreign laws like Sharia in family law cases reflects this concern, signaling legislative intent to prevent any erosion of constitutional protections. And so it's something to watch. The thing is you do see a trend in the world when Islam takes over a nation. And so I think a lot of people are driven by that. They're looking at that and going, hey, these things, what typically happens or a lot of times happens when Islam takes over a nation is incompatible with some of these particular amendments that we have in our Constitution. Again, Epic City developers right now saying these things aren't going to happen, but we'll see. The fourth thing is potential for exclusionary practices. The Constitution protects freedom of association, but communities cannot exclude individuals based on religion or other protected categories under federal laws like the Fair Housing Act. And so critics, including Senator Cornyn, we already talked about him, have questioned whether Epic City might discriminate against non-Muslims, citing its marketing as a Muslim neighborhood. But while developers, again, have affirmed openness to all, the project's emphasis on Islamic identity raises concerns about implicit exclusion, which could violate equal protection or fair housing laws. If the community were to create a de facto religious enclave through cultural or social pressures rather than explicit policy, it could undermine the pluralistic spirit of the Constitution, which ensures all citizens access to public and private spaces. And then the last thing is just sovereignty and secular governance. The Constitution establishes a unified legal framework under federal and state authority. Any community attempting to operate under an alternative legal system, such as Sharia, could challenge this sovereignty. Governor Abbott's February 2025 X post stated, "Sharia law is not allowed in Texas, nor are Sharia cities. Nor are no-go zones, which this project seems to imply." While Epic's developers again deny plans for Sharia governance, the project's scale, a self-contained community with its own institutions, raises fears that a parallel system could operate outside of local oversight. The Texas Commission on Environmental Qualities, they issued a cease and desist order, and ongoing state investigations reflect concerns that Epic City might bypass standard regulatory processes, potentially creating a governance structure that's incompatible with the Constitution's supremacy clause. And one of the issues that's going on right now is they're claiming they're charging or investigating the mosque that's kind of behind this whole project for operating as a funeral home without a license. And so, again, if that's true, I think that investigation is yet to be settled. But if that's true, then that begins to feed into those feelings of, well, do they care what the United States policies and laws are? right? Or they're just going to we're going to set up our community and we're not going to follow any of that. And so that's just one example of an issue that's out there right now that kind of gives the feel of, well, we do what we want. We don't need to follow, we don't need to apply for a license to operate a funeral home. So it's just one example. Commentators like Charlie Kirk have been making the case lately that Islam and the U.S. system are just not compatible at all. And I think he raises an interesting issue. And this is where we are as a nation right now to have to really deal with this. How can a system that is designed to welcome anyone with any perspective survive if groups that typically do not allow different perspectives use that freedom to take power? How do you survive? Your own system sets you up for your system to be destroyed. The same is true for political ideologies like communism. As the saying goes, you can use your freedoms to vote your way into communism, but you can't vote your way out of it. The communists will be happy to use the voting system to get voted in, but then they don't leave, right? And so the tension for Americans is can we truly be wide open to all perspectives if some perspectives are often not open to other perspectives, or if they don't even like the principles that the United States is founded on? I mean, you think about that. If they don't even like and respect and appreciate the principles that the United States is founded on, then how does that work? And this issue is becoming front and center as more and more major cities are electing Muslim mayors, including Zohran Mamdani, who has just won the Democrat primary for New York City mayor. Doesn't mean he's going to become the mayor, but he's the front runner as the Democrat primary winner at this point. And his views also seem to be driven by Marxism and possibly socialism, as well as he talks about government-run grocery stores and things like that. And so that's my opinion, Marxism and socialism, based on the things that I've heard him say. Now, one issue that many have raised is that there have been many communities throughout the history of the U.S. that were dedicated mostly to particular religions or ethnic groups. And it's often the case that groups of people will settle in the same areas where they have things in common with each other. That's just normal. You think of Little Italy and Chinatowns and things like that we see in some of our larger cities. However, there is a difference, listen, between saturation and segregation. Saturation is we enjoy living here. Segregation is nobody else is allowed to live here. And so there's a difference. If an area is off limits to people who don't fit into that category, you've got discrimination, which again runs against the U.S. Constitution. Also, most of the communities that supporters of Epic City point to as examples have not elevated their beliefs above the laws of the land, and they have welcomed others. So something to think about when that argument is being made. This entire conversation brings us back to what I've said about the immigration issue all along. We need to make sure that those who are coming here are on board with assimilating into the main principles of our culture. When we say diversity is our strength, what that can't mean is that everybody comes from different places and believes completely different things and wants the country to be governed in different ways. There has to be something that we hold to and we say this is who we are as Americans, and this is what the principles are, and we all rally behind that. If we can't at least do that, then diversity becomes disunity. It becomes a fracture, right? And so there's got to be some assimilation into just our culture and our main principles of who we are. There has to be. And so it's not good that we're getting more and more people who want to set up their own way of life within our culture and don't even respect our culture. That's not okay. That's a recipe for implosion of a society. People don't have to agree on all the same things. And see, that's what sometimes people hear is, oh, you say everybody has to agree with you, but they don't have to worship the same. But they need to respect our laws. They need to respect the right of other people to voice their opinions. They need to want to relate and know the rest of us and not just want to build a safer, more prosperous version of their own country here. Right now, we've got elected officials at state and federal levels that proclaim that their allegiance is to their home country more than to the U.S. That's not a recipe for unity in diversity. That is a recipe for an implosion. A nation founded on Christian principles is always going to allow more freedom to those who disagree with us than other nations will. But how can a nation like that preserve that principle if it allows those who disagree with that principle to take it over? I'm not sure. I'm not sure we know the answer of how that's going to play out. So what's the biblical approach to this issue? Well, first of all, the Old Testament shows us that while God expected Israel to welcome outsiders, and we hear a lot about those verses, He also expected those outsiders to assimilate into the culture and respect Israel's way of life and worship. God understands that for a nation to survive, people have to be on the same page when it comes to foundational principles. God warns Israel about letting the influence of other people coming into their nation change their focus. That's not what He wants to see. Now, we're not Israel, but it does show that how God kind of sees this issue for the nation that He chose to set up. So whether someone likes it or not, our nation was founded on freedom, representation, equality, free will, being a melting pot, different groups coming together behind those key principles. So how will this work if an emerging group inside of our nation doesn't agree with some of those key principles and wants to set up a whole different thing? But also, as a Christian, we can't live in fear of this kind of thing. And Christians are really bad about this, being panicans, right? And so we should be doing all we can to get to know our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates that come from different religious backgrounds. We should take every opportunity to share our faith and let them see how amazing Jesus is. As with any cultural issue, heart change will bring more unity than arguing or starting a political war against something. As Christians, we're always quick to get bent out of shape about things like this. Yes, our nation was founded on Christian principles. Yes, those principles have made our nation great for 250 years now. And yes, we do want what's best for our country, and we have seen what's best for our country. And we have seen that these principles that are being brought in and these ideologies that are being brought in are not working well around the rest of the world. But at the same time, we can't act like our hope is in politics or forcing others to accept that we have the loudest voice. We have to be about the main thing that Jesus called us to do, which is making disciples. It always comes back to that. So that is all that I have here on the Spiritual Reality Podcast this week. I would love to hear your thoughts on this issue. Is this a big deal? How should Christians respond to it? Would a Christian community receive the same treatment, or would it be better treatment or worse treatment? I don't know. So thanks so much for taking the time to listen, and we will see you next week.